All right, as these composites are starting to come together, which they are, been watching over your shoulders, you're going to notice that some things don't look right. And the majority of that is, number one, having to do with colors, which we dealt with last time. I did a demo. Remember, we talked about the adjustment layers and how to deal with things like color balancing and contrast and so on and so forth. And the other thing is that people or things, as you start to paste them into your images, will appear to not belong. This is an excellent example here. Right? He just looks like he's floating. What's missing? There's actually two things that I think are really big here. Yeah, number one. Shadows. Does anybody know what number two is? Marks in the sand. And that's really key. If you go back and you look at this other one that I did this demo on, here, if you look really close down at his feet, you'll see that when I did my masking, I actually left grass in front of the shoes, and in front of parts of the legs of the chair. What this does is this gives us a sense, okay, that those things are in front of him. Now they're not. In fact, what I just did is I just erased through the layer mask. So let me show you. So if I just take my layer mask here and get a brush, and I'm just going to get the white back here. This would be, you know, what it would probably, whoops, helps if it's, this would be what it would look like, right, when you're starting out. So, you know, getting rid of there. So now, if I just take a look at this, it does kind of look more like he's floating now. It doesn't look right, does it? So if I just go ahead and go in there, and here's how I like to do it, is I'll take my, my opacity, I'll just take the whole layer, and I'll just slide it all the way down to about 50% or so. That way I can see the grass through it. And then I'll look for these long strands of grass that are kind of coming, that are in front of where the foot is actually going to be. And then what I'll do is I'll get the black brush back here, get a really small brush, make sure I've selected my layer mask again, and I'm just going to very carefully, full opacity on this brush, follow these pieces of grass that are going to be in front of the shoe. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and it takes a little bit of practice to do it right. But once you do, the end result is far worth it, just because it really does end up looking really great. And as you'll see in just a second here, so just to do a couple more of these just to get the idea across. Now if I turn the opacity up of the layer, you can see how it's starting to look like the feet are actually behind the grass. Are they really behind the grass? No. What I've done here is I've just created basically a hole in the layer using the mask, the layer mask, to let some of the grass show up. You could do the opposite and copy and paste the grass back onto another layer that's above the foot and so on and so forth. And sometimes that might be a better way of doing things, but in this case, not so much. The negative side to this is that I can't move my guy around anymore. Okay, so he's got to be pretty much where I want him, because if I do move him a little bit, then those lines, those holes that I've created in the layer using the layer mask, those won't match up to the blades of grass anymore, and it could look pretty bad. Okay, so that's one problem. So once we've got a sense of that, the other thing that you'll notice that I did is first I took a look at the overall scene here, and I added an adjustment layer to the background. I wanted to lighten up my midtones a tiny bit. And then I also added some contrast to the layer of the guy in the chair. Take a look at the difference here as I turn it on and off. So this is kind of a review here. But you can see how I increase the contrast to kind of let him match the background a little bit better. But now, as usual, what we're missing is our shadow. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do a shadow, okay? The first thing that most people try to do is they will just add a layer. They'll grab a paintbrush and black, and then they'll just kind of do one of these. Low opacity, right click, low hardness on the brush, and they'll just kind of start painting in a shadow. Now, depending on the light, that might actually work. But take a look at the shadows that we have here on the rocks. They are not the same as what I just did there. Now, that might work. So a lot of it depends upon the background image that you've got. And so this is the biggest thing that I have to tell to you today. Take your clues from the background image. You have to pay attention to details that are in the background image. If I look right now, those are two entirely different types of shadows. That does not work. It does not work at all, because the shadows that I need are sharp. They're harsh, very dark, deep shadows. Take a look at what's in front of this rock here, or I should say probably behind this rock. Look at that shadow. The rock ends somewhere in this area, but the shadow keeps going. What this is telling us is that the sun that was in the sky this day was super bright, made a high contrast scene, and threw long shadows off of the objects. We can see it again if we zoom in and we take a look back here. You can see these long shadows coming off these rocks on the back side of that little hill there, that little mound, again here. So when I look at this, that shadow that I just did is not going to be adequate. So I need to actually have a shadow that isn't a dark blob. Sometimes a dark blob works. Again, it depends on the background image. So don't think right now that I'm saying that a dark blob will never work like I just started here, okay? This very likely could look great in a different scene with a different photograph and all that, okay? You have to be very careful about how you paint it, okay? And notice that I put the layer underneath him so I can be a little sloppier and it doesn't go all over his leg and stuff like that. I can just paint and it makes a shadow. However, just realize that this is not good enough for what we have got going on here. These are sharp shadows and they should look like him. So, if I want to create a shadow that looks a lot like him, where would be the best place to start? Somebody tell me. What's that? Clone him. Okay, I could use the clone tool. We're not going to do that. I'm thinking you're using the word cloning in a more generic term. Be a little more specific. How would you clone him? Duplicate him. Duplicate the layer. Okay? So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to right-click on the layer, and I'm going to duplicate that layer. So now I've got two of this guy. Now notice what happens when you do that. This curves adjustment layer that I had, it unclips from the original. So we're going to just drag that underneath, and then we'll click on our curves layer, and we'll reclip it right now so that we just know that it's all together. Okay, so now we'll turn that off, and now we've got this guy sitting here. What's my next step? Rotate him? Not really rotate. We'll deal with that in a second. First, I need to make him into a shadow. So what do I need to add? Black. It's really simple to do that. Now, if I just go and say edit, fill with black, something bad is going to happen. Okay? Why did that happen? Because I just filled the whole layer. I just filled the whole layer with black. Now, the reason why it didn't go here is because that's where my layer mask is. So it's telling the computer that's transparent. If I take that layer mask off, then it would, I don't want to do that because I just caused it. Well, yeah, let's just delete the layer mask. Watch, I'll undo it. The black really is still there. It's just the layer mask is making it transparent. We don't really want to do that though. Okay, so let me step backwards. What's a way that you might remember from the very first quarter or was it the beginning of the second quarter? I think it was the end of the first quarter that I showed you where you can fill into a pixel-based object without filling the entire layer. Jake?
You lock the thing.
Yes. Good. Lock the transparency right here. So on your layers, you lock the transparency. Okay, so you see those skills that I was teaching you a couple months ago, they continue. You can still keep using them even though the project was nothing like it. So now we're going to go to fill again, and we're going to fill with black, and now it's just him. Now if I delete my layer mask, what's interesting, just to show you what's going on, is it actually does fill the whole square. That used to be that picture of him. But because we've got the layer mask on there, it's fine. The layer mask is actually going to give us troubles eventually. So we're going to have to apply it. We'll get there in a second. So first what I'm going to do then is I'm going to have to make this into more, like get into a better position for the shadow. So first what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip it upside down. Okay? Transform, flip vertical. Now it takes the whole thing and it flips it upside down. Now at this point, I can't do much else until I turn on my other layer, right? Okay. So now I can see that my feet and everything are starting to come together, but you know, things are not always going to work perfectly, right? I mean, that's going to be very, very far and few between when that happens. If I look here, the direction's obviously not right. There's a lot of stuff that's not right. Now I don't want to flip it horizontally because then that's going to flip-flop it. What I need to do is I need to start stretching it and distorting it. Now I could do that in any number of ways. I like to kind of keep the feet together and see if I can get things to stretch. So I'm going, you know, and this takes a little bit of playing too. It never works right off the bat. And you also are going to have to edit your shadow a little bit too. You're going to have to hand draw it a little bit. So don't get too frustrated by this process if it doesn't work perfectly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my distort or perspective or skew or warp. You can play with them. I always play with them because sometimes one will work better and sometimes another will work even better. And you know, so here with my perspective one, let's back up a little bit. I can start shifting this to look like it's perspective. But the problem is it ties these things together. So that generally doesn't work very well. So let me hit the no symbol here. Let's try the distort. So now at distort I can do the same thing. But the difference is, unlike the perspective one, it doesn't tie the corners together. So you can really warp the image really nicely. So my goal here is to kind of stretch this a little bit so that I'm going to get things to look a little bit more like you might expect. Now here's the major problem that you're probably going to see right off the bat. I am not ever going to really get, most likely at least, the legs to actually match all the two legs as well as the two legs of the chair. I'm not going to get his two legs and the two legs of the chair to ever match up perfectly. Okay, they're just not going to happen. So what I need to do is realize I've got a limitation here. And part of the reason is this. The light's coming across his knees like this from over here and straight down this way. But the shadow, that means the shadow would have the two knees that would be almost behind each other. They'd be same part of the shadow. However, what we're using here is from a different direction, so we're seeing both of his legs here and here. So you're going to have to modify things. It's never going to work quite perfectly. The difference is that it does give us just a starting point. That's really what we want, is just a starting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really kind of set it up right about here. That looks about right. The length looks about right. The angle looks about right. I see his arm here. And we're actually going to just modify this a little bit to make it look better. So once I've got it set up to where I think I can work on it, I'm going to hit the check mark. Now again, this is one of those things where You might go and do this for a day and then realize, you know what, it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. Just trash the layer and then try again, okay? Don't get too frustrated. It's a process. You have to try a couple times sometimes to get it right. That's not a horrible thing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I want to erase, okay, pieces of his leg and move things a little bit. So what we're really trying to do is I'm really trying to get this to look, I'm going to basically erase this leg. So now I'm going to have a problem. Watch what's going to happen. I'm going to grab my eraser and I'm going to start erasing. Why is that is it doing that? There's two reasons. Yes. Okay, the layer mask is one problem, but there's another problem we need to deal with first. Why would it go white when I erase? It has to do with something that I turned on when I started this process. The lock is still on. My lock transparency is on. What that means is that will not allow me to erase anything over here. And if I do, what it does is it removes the color, but it does not remove the actual object itself. Okay? So what I need to do is I need to unlock this, and then I can start erasing. Okay, now that's all well and good, but the problem is we also still have a lot of content here because we have our layer mask. So right now, as I'm starting to modify this, I'm going to apply the layer mask, and what that's going to do is it's going to take whatever's black in the layer mask and it's going to delete it. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say apply layer mask. See that? Boom. Now it allows me to erase things very easily and to start playing with how I want this to look. So as I start to look at this, I'm going to go really small here. What I need to do is I need to attach this to here, and I need to add a little bit more of a shadow here. So I'm going to erase this. Okay, and I'm probably going to size this down. Okay, so that's his leg there. We want that to look more natural. And now I'm going to grab my brush, and this time I'm going to start painting. And again, I want to make sure that I want a harder edge brush in this case. Some cases you might need a softer edge brush. And full opacity. And then I'm just going to take my time and I'm just going to add the shadows. It takes a little bit of experience to draw straighter lines with the mouse. They're never perfect, but then again, neither is the ground. So you want to watch the contours of the ground. If it curves or changes really suddenly, you want to make sure that you have something like that. So now as I take a look at this, it's starting to look pretty darn good, okay? You know, maybe it's not perfect, but it's starting to look pretty good. Now I know I've got some other issues. There's two more chair legs in here that I need to worry about. So I'm going to add those in really quickly here. And that's the beauty of having that layer behind him, is I can just keep on drawing and I don't need to worry about it. Whoops, went a little sideways here. As I said, it's hard to draw a straight line. If you need a really straight line, do you guys know that trick? Here's a good trick. If you really need a really straight line in Photoshop, take your brush, click once with the brush here, go to where you want it to be, hold the Shift key down and click again. And draws a straight line between the 2 points. Ready? So let's try that one more time because this one wasn't so hot either. So let's erase it, okay? And now I'm going to grab my brush, I'm going to click once, then I'm going to hold the Shift key down and click again. Not too shabby. Now one of the things that I want to watch out for is the angle. The angle of these legs all needs to be the same because they're all coming from the same light source. This one's a little off. So I'm going to go and erase that one now. because it's probably easier for me to change that one. And I'm just going to click here to here. Yeah, that works. And then this one's a little off too, so let's go back and redo that one. I could have redone the other two, I guess. It doesn't really matter. So there to there. Now they're all basically going in the same direction. See? So now, as I'm looking at this, we're starting to look like it's a pretty decent shadow. I think there's only a couple other things that I'd like to do, and one of them is I do want to make it a little lighter in opacity. Just a little bit. So what we can do is we can start to see that there are some details in the grass. The other thing is, little things like here, where the rock is, probably should just cut that out. I'm going to use the eraser and just cut it out so that it comes out from behind the rock. Because chances are the rock wouldn't have a shadow on it. It might, but chances are that it wouldn't. Okay? And then further playing with it, you can chop it up, you can lighten it. So, you know, here it hits another rock. I would think that that would be a little lighter. So I'm going to take, I might even add a layer mask now and take a black brush, and with really low opacity, I might just make the shadow a little lighter in that section where that rock is, and there's another rock right here. See that? It just kind of looks a little bit more realistic, doesn't it? You know, because those rocks are going to reflect a little bit more light than the grass will. Okay? There's all sorts of things that you can do. He's wearing a white shirt. I might even go in and hand paint a little bit of green, just a slight tinge green on the white shirt to make it look like the green light from the grass is reflecting up into the shirt. There are a number of things that you can do to start making this more realistic. Now, let me deal with one last thing having to deal with shadows, and that is you need to watch the direction of the shadows. Let's just say, for instance, that when I copy and pasted my guy, he was like this. Okay? Problem. What's the problem with this? The shadows are on the left side of the image on his layer, but on the background layer, the shadows are all on the right. So basically what that means is in the background, the sun's on the left, and in his picture, the sun's on the right. Okay? This is easily fixed by flipping them. But be mindful, you should probably do that right away, right, you know, off the bat when you're copying and pasting images in. Look at the direction of the lighting and make sure that it matches. If it's a little off, I'm sure the lighting's not perfectly on here. I'm sure that the sun, when I photographed this picture of Ryan, my friend Ryan there, I'm sure the sun's not in exactly the same position as it was for that background photograph. But you know what? They're close enough that when I flip him around, it matches. Okay? So, number one, pay attention to details. Details, details, details. Contrast, lighting. Where's the shadows coming from? Color balancing. These are the little things that will get you in trouble when you start to, you know, do your images. If you don't pay a lot of attention to these things, your images will not look the way you want them to. Okay? You can always tell a movie where they didn't spend a lot of money on special effects in 3 areas when it's a movie special effects. Number one is the texturing of the objects. You know, what kind of a surface it has. Number 2, shadows. The shadows will be a slightly different darkness or lightness compared to the background. And the third is the colors. The color balances won't match. And that just means that they were doing a rush job and they weren't spending a lot of money on it. It's plain and simple. So these little details like this is where your stuff really takes off. You'll probably spend almost as much time on these little details as you do on, you know, the overall finding the images and putting them in there, because this is the most complicated part. Okay, any questions? All right.